On the Giza Plateau, the Great Pyramid rises against the horizon, its ancient stones glowing beneath the sun's relentless gaze. For thousands of years it has stood here, a monument to the genius of its builders, a symbol of Egypt itself. But what if this colossal structure, and everything we see around it, is only the surface, just the visible peak of something far greater, hidden deep below the sands? What if beneath our feet lies an entire world, sealed away for millennia, holding secrets that could shatter everything we think we know about the past? If what lies beneath the Giza Plateau is real, then our entire timeline of human civilization may be wrong. Histories carved in stone could be just fragments of a much bigger story, one that began long before the first pharaoh. But if we choose not to look deeper, the truth may stay buried forever, hidden beneath sand and time. Subscribe so you don't miss what we uncover next. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? And what time is it there right now? We discover something extraordinary. New scans reveal massive structures hidden deep beneath the Giza Plateau. Advanced ground-penetrating radar has detected vast shapes and patterns carved into the bedrock, stretching far beyond anything seen before. These are not random voids or natural caves. Their symmetry, precision, and scale suggest intelligent design. What lies below could be part of an underground complex on a scale we've never imagined, sealed away for thousands of years, waiting to be understood. It began with a permit, granted after months of careful negotiation. Access to scan a restricted section of the Giza Plateau is not given lightly, and when it is, every moment counts. For Dr. Corrado Malonga, a geophysicist specializing in subsurface imaging, and his colleague, archaeological engineer Filippo Biondi, the permission represented more than just an opportunity. It was the chance to apply decades of expertise to one of the most studied landscapes in the world, in search of what might still be hidden beneath its surface. Both men came to the project with reputations earned through precision work. Malonga had developed scanning systems capable of reading deep into collapsed mine shafts without physical intrusion, mapping voids with remarkable accuracy. Biondi, meanwhile, had overseen the restoration of ancient stonework from the Mediterranean to the Middle East, often using engineering surveys to reveal construction details invisible to the naked eye. Together, they formed a partnership built on technical mastery and a shared belief. Even in a place as documented as Giza, there are still stories waiting in the ground. Their target area lay near the Pyramid of Giza on a stretch of bedrock, rarely scanned at depth. While much of the plateau had been explored by earlier surveys, limitations in technology had left deeper layers inaccessible. This new mission aimed to overcome those barriers, pushing ground-penetrating radar further than it had ever been used on the site. The system they brought was unlike the portable radar units often seen in archaeological digs. Designed specifically for this project, it employed ultra-low frequency waves to penetrate dense limestone to depths exceeding 2,000 feet, far beyond the reach of most previous surveys. The trade-off was speed. Each scan covered only a small area, requiring hours of methodical movement and calibration. But depth was their priority. The antennas transmitted pulses into the ground, measuring the time and strength of the reflections as they bounced back from subsurface features. Sophisticated filtering removed interference from groundwater and mineral variation, leaving behind a clear profile of the hidden layers. Supporting the radar was a second, equally important, two-LAN AI-driven processing system capable of identifying repeating geometric patterns. Natural voids, such as caves or cracks, return signals in irregular forms. Man-made structures, however, tend to leave sharp, consistent echo straight lines, right angles, or curves of perfect symmetry. The software, trained on thousands of confirmed archaeological examples, could flag anomalies in near real time, allowing the team to adjust their scans on the spot. At first, the images displayed what the researchers expected: nevenstone layers, small fissures, and scattered mineral deposits. The upper depths told no new story. But then, as the radar pushed past the 1,500-foot mark, something unusual began to emerge. Against the rough, chaotic background of natural geology, faint arcs appeared. One scan showed a curve. The next scan, slightly offset, revealed another, matching in size and spacing. The team rescanned the area, adjusting frequency and direction. With each pass, the arcs resolved into a continuous former spiral, not a loose, irregular coil shaped by natural forces, but a tightly measured, evenly spaced structure winding downward into the bedrock. Its geometry was remarkably consistent, the spacing between each curve maintained with precision over hundreds of feet. Could this be a natural formation? Beyond he considered the possibility. Spiral patterns can occur in nature, though rarely in rock of this density and depth. The data, however, showed a level of uniformity that was difficult to explain without deliberate design. Even the angle of descent appeared regular, as though following a blueprint. As the scans continued, the system detected variations within the spiral zones, where the radar reflections indicated hollow spaces. Some appeared as isolated pockets, others as connected channels. The team could not yet determine whether these were chambers, corridors, or something else entirely. What they did know was that the spiral formation extended deeper than any known structure beneath Giza, and it was unlike anything recorded in the region's geological surveys. Back in their temporary field lab, the researchers reviewed the compiled 3D model. On the screen, the spiral unfolded in pale lines, suspended in a block of digital stone. Its scale was difficult to grasp. This was not a feature a few meters across, but a massive helix embedded far below the plateau's surface. To the trained eye, its regularity was undeniable. When word of the anomaly reached a small circle of trusted colleagues, reactions were mixed. Some, like structural geologist Dr. Eleanor Strauss, saw the formation as a potential breakthrough. Its symmetry is striking, she noted in a private report, and there are no known geological processes in this region that would produce such a structure naturally. She also pointed to the association between spirals and certain ancient engineering solutions. Spirals could serve as ramps, guiding people or materials gradually downward. Others were more cautious. Archaeologist Professor Karim Al-Hussein warned against premature conclusions. Radar data can be deceptive at great depth, he explained. Diffraction, signal loss, and interference can create patterns that mimic human design. We must exhaust all geological explanations before considering this as a constructed feature. Malunga and Biondi understood the skepticism. In archaeology, extraordinary interpretations demand extraordinary evidence. They also knew that accessing the spiral directly would be nearly impossible under current regulations. Drilling or excavation at such depths would require unprecedented permissions from Egyptian authorities. For now, the spiral existed only as data, an image formed from pulses of energy and careful analysis. Speculating on its purpose was a cautious exercise. If it was artificial, why build such a feature deep within solid limestone? A spiral ramp could suggest a method for transporting materials, perhaps related to the construction of the pyramids themselves. It could also have served as an access route to deeper chambers, designed to descend gradually while keeping a stable incline. Another possibility, though less functional and more symbolic, was that the spiral had ritual significance. Ancient Egyptian cosmology placed great importance on journeys to the underworld. Perhaps the spiral was a literal path downward, mirroring spiritual beliefs in physical form. Engineering such a structure would have been a monumental challenge. Cutting a precise spiral into solid bedrock requires advanced planning, accurate surveying, and considerable manpower. The logistics, ventilation, lighting, debris removal would have been formidable. If it was truly ancient, this would represent a level of subterranean engineering not documented anywhere else in Egypt's known history. In the end, the anomaly raised more questions than it answered. Was it a geological curiosity formed by processes we do not yet understand? Was it the remnant of an unknown phase of construction, lost to recorded history? Or was it evidence of an entirely different kind of activity beneath the Giza Plateau, one that challenges our current timeline of Egyptian civilization? The spiral remains there, silent, invisible to the naked eye, its full reality known only through the ghostly lines of radar data. Until further exploration becomes possible, it will sit in the records as both an anomaly and an invitation, one that asks not only what lies beneath, but how far we are willing to go to find out. The spiral was only the beginning. When its presence was confirmed in the radar data, it became clear to the research community that this was not an isolated anomaly, but part of a much larger puzzle. In response, a second team arrived, bringing not only a new perspective, but new technology capable of expanding the search far beyond the original scanning zone. This was not a replacement effort, but a continuation aimed at answering the question that now hung over the project. If the spiral was real, what else lay beneath the Giza Plateau? The team was led by Dr. Nadia Rami, a geospatial mapping specialist whose work had previously focused on large-scale subterranean surveys in complex environments. She was joined by Lucas Meyer, a systems engineer with expertise in integrating multi-sensor imaging systems. Together, they brought a hybrid scanning setup, combining ultra-deep ground-penetrating radar with muon tomography. Unlike radar alone, muon detection uses subatomic particles that naturally pass through the Earth, allowing researchers to map dense structures and voids with remarkable precision. The combination of these two systems provided both depth and clarity, reducing the possibility of false readings and expanding the range of what could be detected. The methodology was systematic. The plateau was divided into a grid, with each segment scanned using overlapping passes to ensure no feature went undetected. The radar provided detailed horizontal slices of the subsurface, while the muon tomography built a vertical density map, highlighting areas where stone gave way to open space. The initial datasets were enormous gigabytes of measurements from every angle, but as the processing software began to assemble them into a coherent 3D model, the picture that emerged was unlike anything the researchers had anticipated. The spiral, it turned out, was not alone. Branching outward from its lower reaches were narrow conduits, some sloping, some level, leading into a network of chambers of varying sizes. The configuration was too organized to be the work of nature. Some of the chambers were small and compact, perhaps no more than storage rooms. Others were vast, with dimensions suggesting internal spaces large enough to hold entire gatherings. The layout extended far beyond the footprint of any single pyramid, weaving beneath open ground and into areas where no above-ground structures existed. As the mapping progressed, the scale became apparent. The interconnected network stretched for miles, with multiple access points, most sealed or collapsed long ago. Certain chambers aligned with the axes of the Great Pyramid and the Pyramid of Khafre, while others appeared directly beneath lesser-known monuments and mastabas. The degree of alignment raised intriguing possibilities about intentional planning, perhaps linking the underground spaces to ceremonial functions above. In comparative archaeology, subterranean complexes are not unknown. In Cappadocia, Turkey, the underground city of Dorinkü extends to a depth of more than 200 feet, with living quarters, ventilation shafts, wells, and storage areas capable of sheltering thousands for extended periods. In China, the Yaodong cave systems served as both dwellings and fortifications for centuries. Even in Egypt, the tombs of the Valley of the Kings reveal the capacity of ancient builders to carve extensive corridors and chambers into solid rock. Yet none of these examples match the sheer depth, spatial reach, and integration with surface monuments suggested by the Giza data. What could such a complex have been for? One interpretation points towards storage, both practical and symbolic. Chambers of varying sizes could have held grain, tools, or ceremonial goods. Another possibility is refuge, a hidden stronghold to protect people during times of conflict or environmental catastrophe. There is also the religious dimension. In ancient Egyptian belief, the underworld was a structured realm with gateways, trials, and regions assigned specific meanings. An underground network beneath the heart of their most important necropolis could have served as a physical representation of that spiritual journey. Some researchers also consider engineering functions. A spiral leading to deep chambers could facilitate the movement of materials either during the construction of the pyramids or for maintenance in the centuries that followed. The complex could also have played a role in water management, though the geological evidence for this remains sparse. Without physical access, these interpretations remain speculative, but the organization and scale of the mapped spaces suggest purpose, not accident. Despite the clarity of the imaging, significant challenges remain. The greatest obstacle is access. Excavating to such depths beneath a site of immense cultural importance requires more than technical capability, demands permission from the Egyptian Antiquities Authority, whose mandate is to preserve the integrity of the monuments. Concerns about structural stability, potential damage to above-ground monuments, and the risk of uncontrolled intrusion have so far prevented any attempt at direct exploration. Skeptical voices also remain. Some geologists caution that even with combined radar and muon tomography, anomalies can be misinterpreted. Patterns that appear deliberate may, under certain conditions, emerge from natural processes such as faulting, mineralization, or erosion. These possibilities must be considered carefully, particularly in a site with such complex geology. Others note that without physical confirmation, any claims about the nature of the chambers are provisional, however compelling the imagery may be. Still, the evidence has shifted the conversation. What began as a single spiral anomaly is now understood as part of a broader subterranean landscape, one whose scale demands explanation. The data does not confirm who built it, when it was made, or why it exists, but it does suggest that beneath Giza lies a constructed environment of remarkable extent and complexity. It challenges the notion that the plateau is fully known, and invites a reconsideration of what may yet be hidden beneath its ancient stones. For the researchers, the task is twofold: to continue refining the maps, improving the resolution and accuracy of the imaging, and to work within the constraints of preservation and regulation to secure eventual access. Until that happens, the vast underground network remains an architectural ghost visible in data, invisible to the eye, and waiting for the moment when its silence will finally be broken. Not all discoveries beneath the Giza plateau come wrapped in vast mysteries or sweeping theories. Some are small, precise, and unambiguous, and it is often these modest findings that provide the most reliable steps forward. While the deeper scanning teams pursued images of spirals and sprawling chamber networks, another group worked quietly on the plateau's western edge, far from the attention of headlines. Their aim was not to prove a revolutionary theory, but to record, with care and accuracy, the details of what lay just beneath the surface. This was the Japanese mission, led by Dr. Hiroshi Tanaka, a specialist in non-invasive archaeological surveying. His approach was cautious by design. In the world of archaeology, large-scale claims draw large-scale scrutiny, and without physical confirmation, Even the most sophisticated scans can be questioned. Tanaka's team focused instead on shallow, ground-penetrating radar equipment tuned for high resolution rather than extreme depth. By working within a few meters of the surface, they could see details too small for deeper scans to resolve, and verify their results with direct sampling. Their area of interest was the Western Cemetery, a section of the plateau known for its mastabes, the rectangular tombs of high-ranking officials from Egypt's Old Kingdom. This part of Giza has been surveyed before, but much of it remains unexcavated, and the complex interplay of sand, stone, and centuries of debris means that not every subsurface feature has been documented. Tanaka's methodical grid scanning began to pick up anomalies almost immediately. In multiple locations, the radar returned distinct geometric forms, primarily L-shaped structures, accompanied by small, rounded cavities nearby. The patterns were consistent across separate scans, suggesting that these were not natural irregularities in the stone. Unlike deeper projects that must rely solely on imaging, Tanaka's team could physically verify their findings. Once anomalies were mapped, narrow core samples were drilled into the target areas. These cylindrical columns of soil and stone about the diameter of a wrist provided direct evidence of what the radar had detected. Where the scans showed solid bedrock, the cores came up intact. Where the scans indicated voids or constructed spaces, the cores told a different story. Compacted fill, fragments of worked limestone, and traces of ancient mortar in several cases. The mortar samples matched the composition used in other known mastaba substructures, strengthening the link between the anomalies and recognized architectural styles. The rounded cavities proved to be intentionally cut pits, their walls smoothed by tools. Many were of a size and shape consistent with storage shafts or offering pits found in other Old Kingdom tomb complexes. The L-shaped forms were particularly telling. In Egyptian tomb design, such layouts often served practical and symbolic purposes. A dogleg corridor turning at a right angle could conceal the main burial chamber from direct view, adding both security and a ritual sense of transition. The orientation and dimensions of the L-shaped features beneath the Western Cemetery matched those of documented mastabas in nearby excavated sections. Tanaka's results may not have captured the imagination of the public in the way a vast underground city might, but for archaeologists, they carried significant weight. Each rarefied structure added a new point of reference to the growing map of Giza's subsurface. These finds allowed researchers to refine their understanding of burial practices, construction techniques, and the social hierarchy reflected in the arrangement of tombs. Such incremental discoveries play an essential role in the broader archaeological process. Grand theories often rest on the foundation of small, verifiable facts that can withstand peer review and that other teams can replicate. By carefully documenting both the location and structure of each feature, and by backing up radar data with physical samples, Tanaka's work avoided the pitfalls of over-interpretation. The contrast with more sensational projects was not lost on the academic community. While debates raged over the interpretation of deep anomalies, the Japanese team quietly built a record of confirmed architecture. Their results could be published, cited, and incorporated into the official archaeological record without the caveat of In time, these mapped and confirmed features might even connect to deeper structures detected by other teams, providing a bridge between the known and the hypothesized. From a broader perspective, the significance of Tanaka's discoveries lies in their reliability. They may represent only a small piece of the Giza Plateau's vast history, but each one is a piece we can place with confidence. In an environment where speculation can outpace evidence, such confidence is invaluable. The Western Cemetery still holds many areas that have never been excavated. As shallow surveys continue, they will likely reveal more mastabas, more storage pits, and perhaps eventually features that hint at links to the deeper mysteries, still hidden far below. For now, the L-shaped structures and their associated cavities stand as a reminder. Not all progress in understanding the past comes in leaps. Sometimes it comes in careful steps, each one small, deliberate, and placed on solid ground. And those steps, however modest they may seem, are the ones that will carry us closer to the truth. Throughout the history of archaeology, there have been moments when a single discovery has forced scholars to rethink the timeline of human civilization. These moments often arrive quietly, in the dust of excavation pits, or in the laboratory results of dating tests. But their consequences can ripple through entire disciplines. They are rarely embraced immediately. Instead, they pass through a period of skepticism, debate, and, at times, outright dismissal. One of the clearest examples is Göbekli Tepe, a site in southeastern Turkey that came to the attention of the world in the mid-1990s. What German archaeologist Klaus Schmidt and his team uncovered there was unlike anything known from its period. Massive stone pillars, some carved with intricate reliefs of animals and abstract symbols, arranged in circular enclosures. Radiocarbon dating placed their construction around 9600 BCE, thousands of years before the advent of agriculture in the region. This was not supposed to be possible. According to the prevailing narrative, complex, monumental architecture emerged only after settled farming communities developed the resources and social structures to support it. For many scholars, the implications were uncomfortable. If Göbekli Tepe was indeed that old, it meant hunter-gatherer societies were capable of organizing large-scale construction projects, managing resources, and coordinating labor in ways previously attributed only to agrarian cultures. This did not fit neatly into established models of cultural evolution. Some critics questioned the dating methods. Others suggested the site might have been built by a more advanced culture that had been overlooked or misinterpreted in the archaeological record. The debates continued for years, but as more excavations were carried out and more enclosures were uncovered, the evidence mounted. The site's age was confirmed by multiple independent dating tests. The complexity of its construction was undeniable. What began as a controversial claim slowly became a case study in how evidence, when consistently supported and replicated, can force even the most entrenched academic positions to shift. Today, Göbekli Tepe is recognized as one of the most important archaeological discoveries of the late 20th century, not because it was immediately accepted, but because it survived the process of rigorous scrutiny. Other examples follow a similar pattern. The discovery of pre-Clovis archaeological sites in the Americas challenged the long-held belief that the first humans arrived around 13,000 years ago via the Bering Land Bridge. Sites like Monteverde in Chile, dated to at least 18,500 years ago, initially faced strong opposition from mainstream archaeology. Critics questioned the dating, the interpretation of artifacts, and the methods used in excavation. Yet repeated investigations and cross-disciplinary studies gradually built a case too strong to ignore. Today, early human presence in the Americas is an accepted reality, though debates over exact migration routes continue. Even within Egypt, there have been moments when the accepted timeline wavered under the pressure of new findings. Of the Sphinx's age, proposed in the 1990s based on patterns of water erosion, met immediate resistance from Egyptologists. While the idea remains contentious, it illustrates how challenges to established chronologies can ignite intense debate, drawing in not only archaeologists but also geologists, historians, and engineers. What links these examples is not just the controversy, but the process that follows it. Initial skepticism is often intense, rooted in the natural caution of science, the protection of existing frameworks, and, at times, the professional reputations invested in them. But when evidence is methodically gathered, independently verified, and consistently points in the same direction, the academic consensus does change. The discoveries now being discussed beneath the Giza Plateau, from deep spiral formations to potential vast underground chambers, are entering this same historical pattern. Whether they will follow the path of Göbekli Tepe, eventually accepted as transformative, or remain in the category of unresolved anomalies, will depend not on their immediate impact, but on the rigor of the evidence that supports them. In archaeology, time is often the greatest test. In Egypt, the process of confirming an extraordinary discovery is complicated not only by the evidence itself, but by the legal and administrative framework that governs archaeological work. The Giza Plateau, along with many other ancient sites across the country, falls under the authority of the Egyptian Ministry of Tourism and Antiquities. Access to these locations is tightly controlled, and excavation permits are issued sparingly. The official rationale for this control is straightforward preservation. These monuments are among the most visited and photographed in the world, and they represent a vital part of Egypt's cultural heritage. Any excavation carries the risk of damaging fragile structures, disturbing unexcavated layers, or accelerating erosion once buried spaces are exposed to air and light. Strict oversight is meant to ensure that every dig is carried out according to rigorous conservation standards. Yet, the reality on the ground is more complex. Approval for excavation often depends on lengthy application processes, requiring detailed proposals, proof of funding, and collaboration with Egyptian institutions. Foreign teams must partner with local experts, and all findings are subject to review before public release. This means that even if scans or surveys reveal something remarkable, such as large voids beneath the plateau, turning that data into a physical excavation can take years. If it happens at all, there is also the matter of protecting Egypt's established historical narrative. Tourism is a cornerstone of the national economy, and the image of ancient Egypt presented to the world is carefully curated. Dramatic reinterpretations of the past, especially those that might suggest advanced structures predating the dynastic era, risk disrupting that narrative. In such cases, authorities may choose to limit exploration until the implications are fully understood, or until the evidence can be framed within a context consistent with existing history. Some archaeologists see this as a necessary safeguard, ensuring that premature or speculative claims do not undermine public trust in Egyptology. Others view it as a barrier that slows progress, potentially leaving significant discoveries unexplored for decades. The truth may lie somewhere between these perspectives. What is certain is that the path from detection to excavation in Egypt is rarely direct. For those hoping to confirm deep structures beneath Giza, the challenge is not only to prove their existence scientifically, but also to navigate the administrative and political landscape that decides whether the sands will be disturbed at all. Beyond the physical and legal restrictions on excavation, there are broader forces that influence how new discoveries are received, forces rooted in academia, politics, and economics. Each plays a role in shaping the pace and direction of archaeological research, and each can add layers of resistance to ideas that challenge the established order. In academia, the weight of consensus is both a strength and a limitation. Scientific disciplines rely on peer review, replication, and cautious interpretation to build reliable knowledge. This safeguards the field from errors and unfounded claims, but it also means that truly unconventional findings face an uphill battle. Scholars who support controversial interpretations too early can risk their professional standing, their ability to secure research funding, and even their positions at universities or museums. The safer course is often to withhold endorsement until overwhelming evidence emerges, evidence that is difficult to obtain when direct excavation is restricted. Politics also plays a part, especially in countries where archaeology is tied to national identity. Ancient Egypt is more than a subject of historical study, is a symbol of heritage, pride, and continuity. Shifts in the accepted narrative can carry political weight, affecting not only academic debates, but also cultural, policy, and public perception. Governments may be reluctant to endorse or even allow research that could be interpreted as undermining national heritage stories that have been presented for generations. Economics adds another dimension. The tourism industry in Egypt is a multi-billion sector, with the pyramids at Giza as its centerpiece. The narrative sold to millions of visitors each year is streamlined, clear, and built on decades of familiar imagery: the reign of the pharaohs, the construction of the pyramids in the 4th dynasty, the alignment of monuments to celestial events. Introducing radically different interpretations, particularly those that could suggest a far older origin for certain features, could create uncertainty, potentially impacting the way the site is marketed and understood. These three caution, political stewardship, and economic interest do not always act in unison, but when they align, they can create powerful inertia. This does not necessarily mean that new discoveries are suppressed for malicious reasons. Often, the goal is to ensure that only well-supported, carefully framed information reaches the public. But the result is the same, potentially transformative. Findings may remain in limbo, waiting for a moment when the evidence, the political climate, and the cultural readiness align. It is within this complex environment that the discoveries beneath the Giza Plateau must be understood. The interplay of scientific rigor, national heritage, and economic stability will determine not only how these findings are studied, but whether they are ever fully revealed at all. Until then, the deeper mysteries may continue to exist more in the realm of data and theory than in the touch of stone and the light of day. For centuries, the Great Sphinx has been interpreted through the lens of traditional Egyptology's origins firmly placed in the Old Kingdom. During the reign of Pharaoh Khufu, around 2500 BCE, that interpretation went largely unchallenged until the late 20th century, when two researchers approached the monument from an entirely different angle. Their collaboration would ignite one of the most enduring debates in modern archaeology. The first was John Anthony West, an independent author and researcher with a deep interest in alternative views of ancient history. West was not trained as an archaeologist, but his studies of symbolism, architecture, and ancient texts had led him to question whether the official timeline of Egypt's monuments was complete. In particular, he suspected that the Sphinx might be far older than generally accepted. His curiosity was sparked by earlier observations, dating back to the 1950s, that the weathering on the Sphinx did not appear to match what would be expected. From wind-blown sand alone, seeking a scientific evaluation, West turned to Dr. Robert Schoch, a geologist from Boston University. Schoch had no prior agenda regarding the Sphinx. His expertise lay in analyzing rock formations and identifying the processes that shaped them. West's invitation was simple: examine the monument and its surrounding enclosure purely from a geological standpoint, without regard to established archaeological assumptions. In the early 1990s, Schoch traveled to Giza and began a detailed visual and photographic survey of the Sphinx. He also studied the limestone walls of its enclosure, where the bedrock is exposed in vertical faces. His approach was methodical, applying the same criteria he would use in any geological field study. It was during this work that he began to see patterns that, in his view, did not fit the accepted explanation of desert erosion. The collaboration between West and Schoch was unusual. One came from outside the academic mainstream, driven by a hypothesis. The other was an established scientist entering the debate for the first time. Together, They brought a combination of curiosity and analytical rigor to a monument that had been studied for generations, but rarely questioned in this way. Their findings, first presented at a geological conference and later publicized through documentaries and publications, would challenge the conventional dating of the Sphinx and open the door to a new, controversial interpretation of its history. When Dr. Robert Schoch examined the Sphinx enclosure in detail, his attention focused on the patterns carved into the limestone walls and the body of the monument itself. These were not the sharp, angular cuts typically produced by wind-driven sand. Instead, the surfaces displayed deep vertical channels, rounded profiles, and an undulating texture more consistent with the effects of prolonged exposure to flowing water and heavy rainfall. From a geological perspective, this distinction is significant. In arid environments like modern-day Giza, wind erosion tends to produce horizontal striations and sharp edges as particles are blasted against rock surfaces over time. Water erosion, however, moves differently, seeps into cracks, widens them, and rounds the stone as it flows, often leaving vertical fissures where runoff has concentrated. To Schoch, the features within the Sphinx enclosure bore the unmistakable signature of water's action over centuries. The question then became one of timing. The Giza Plateau has been hyperaride for most of the last 5 millennia, with only occasional short bursts of rainfall. The kind of sustained wet conditions needed to produce such erosion had not existed here, according to climate records, since the end of the last ice age. This places the formation of the erosion of Schoch's analysis is correct thousands of years earlier than the accepted construction date of the Sphinx. Schoch was not alone in making this observation. Other geologists, including some who had not been directly involved with the project, noted similar weathering patterns and acknowledged that water was a likely factor. The challenge lay in reconciling this with Egypt's established archaeological timeline. There is no direct evidence such as artifacts, inscriptions, or datable structures from a civilization in Egypt that far back in time capable of building the Sphinx. John Anthony West saw in this erosion the confirmation of his suspicion that the Sphinx's core structure could be far older than the dynastic Egypt we know, possibly inherited by later pharaohs and recarved into its current form. For Schoch, the geological evidence pointed to an earlier origin, but he was cautious about proposing who had built it or for what purpose. His conclusions, presented at scientific conferences and in published studies, focused on the physical data, the stone's condition, the nature of the weathering, and the climatic history required to produce it. The erosion evidence became the cornerstone of what is now called the Sphinx water erosion hypothesis, challenge to conventional dating that rests not on speculation, but on the rock itself and the story it appears to have recorded through thousands of years of exposure to the elements. The water erosion hypothesis quickly drew the attention and criticism of mainstream Egyptologists and other geologists. For many in the field, the idea that the Sphinx could predate the Old Kingdom by thousands of years conflicted not only with the established chronology of Egypt, but also with the broader picture of early human civilization. One of the most common counter-arguments centered on the nature of the limestone itself. The Sphinx and its enclosure are carved from layers of bedrock of varying hardness. Softer layers erode more quickly than harder ones, and wind-blown sand, combined with occasional rainfall, could produce irregular surfaces over time. According to this view, the rounded profiles observed by Schoch might be the result of differential erosion rather than proof of a wetter climate in deep antiquity. Another point raised by critics involves Egypt's known climate history. While the region has been predominantly arid for the past 5,000 years, there have been intermittent periods of heavier rainfall even during the dynastic era. These events, though brief, could have contributed to the weathering patterns without requiring the Sphinx to date back to a much earlier, wetter. Also emphasize the lack of supporting archaeological evidence for such an early origin. If the Sphinx had been built several millennia before the Old Kingdom, it would imply the existence of a culture with advanced stoneworking skills long before any currently known in Egypt, yet no tools, settlement remains, or inscriptions from such a culture have been found. In their view, extraordinary claims require a broader base of evidence than geology alone can provide. Some geologists sympathetic to the traditional dating argue that alternative erosional processes such as salt crystallization, which can cause stone to flake and crumble, may also play a role. Over centuries, the combination of salt weathering, wind abrasion, and occasional rain could produce features that superficially resemble water runoff channels. While these counter-arguments do not negate Schock's observations outright, they offer competing interpretations that fit more comfortably within the accepted historical framework. For the majority of Egyptologists, the Sphinx remains a product of the 4th dynasty, carved under Khafu's reign, with its weathered surface the result of thousands of years of exposure in a challenging desert environment. The debate, therefore, is less about whether the erosion exists. Both sides acknowledge its presence, and more about the timescale and environmental conditions required to produce it. In this contested space between geology and archaeology, the Sphinx continues to inspire discussion, each perspective shaped by the weight of its own evidence and the framework through which that evidence is viewed. If the water erosion hypothesis were to gain broad acceptance, its implications for Egyptian chronology would be profound. The current timeline of ancient Egypt is anchored by a combination of archaeological finds, inscriptions, and radiocarbon dating, all of which place the emergence of large-scale stone architecture firmly within the Old Kingdom. Around 2600 to 2500 BCE, the Sphinx, tied by most scholars to the reign of Khafu, fits neatly within that framework. However, if the geological evidence presented by Dr. Robert Schock is correct, the Sphinx's core structure could predate the Old Kingdom by thousands of years, possibly extending back to the Neolithic period, when Egypt's climate was wetter and more hospitable. Such a shift would suggest the existence of an earlier, and currently undocumented, culture in the Nile Valley with the engineering knowledge, organizational capacity, and tools to carve a monument of such scale. This would not be a minor adjustment to the historical record. It would mean that Egypt's history of monumental architecture began not with the pharaohs of the 4th dynasty, but in a deep past that is now considered prehistoric. It would also force a re-examination of the development of social complexity, technological innovation, and cultural expression in the region. If an advanced culture existed during that period, why has no direct material evidence, settlements, tools, written records been identified? Could such evidence still lie buried beneath the Nile, silt, or hidden in unexcavated sites? The ripple effects would extend beyond Egypt. A confirmed earlier date for the Sphinx could challenge assumptions about the rise of civilization globally. It would place sophisticated stoneworking alongside or even before the earliest known examples in Mesopotamia and Anatolia, drawing comparisons to sites like Göbekli Tepe. Such a finding might imply that the capacity for large-scale construction emerged independently in multiple regions far earlier than currently believed, or that knowledge was shared through networks we have yet to fully trace. For now, these implications remain hypothetical, tethered to a geological interpretation that has not been universally accepted. But the very possibility illustrates why the debate over the Sphinx's age continues to resonate. It is not just a question of how old a single monument might be. It is a question of how far back the roots of civilization may extend, and whether our current timeline captures the full story. Until more evidence emerges, whether from excavations, new dating methods, or the discovery of related structures, the Sphinx will remain both a landmark of Egypt's known history and a tantalizing hint of a past we have yet to uncover. For many, the idea of hidden chambers beneath the Great Sphinx is not merely an archaeological curiosity, but part of a legend that blends ancient myth with modern mysticism. In the 20th century, this legend was popularized by the American psychic Edgar Cayce, whose readings often touched on ancient civilizations and lost knowledge. Cayce claimed that the Sphinx guarded the entrance to what he called the Hall of Records, a repository of wisdom from a much earlier epoch, specifically from the lost civilization of Atlantis. According to Cayce, this hall would contain historical records, maps, and technological knowledge preserved by survivors of Atlantis, who, he said, had migrated to various parts of the world before their homeland was destroyed. One of these groups, Cayce claimed, traveled to Egypt and constructed the Sphinx as a sentinel, concealing the entrance to the hall beneath its massive stone body. In his timeline, the Hall of Records would remain sealed until humanity reached a stage of spiritual maturity, at which point it would be discovered and its knowledge revealed. Cayce's readings were not treated as historical evidence by archaeologists, but they captured the imagination of the public and inspired decades of speculation. The idea that the Sphinx might hide something extraordinary resonated with those who believed that ancient civilizations were more advanced or more interconnected than mainstream history suggests. Over time, this belief became intertwined with broader theories of lost knowledge, hidden chambers, and ancient global networks. Even without physical proof, the Hall of Records legend persisted because it offered a narrative that bridged history, mystery, and human aspiration. It suggested that beneath the familiar stone surface of one of the world's most recognizable monuments might lie not just empty space, but a deliberate archive meant for a distant future audience, whether taken as prophecy, allegory, or possibility. Cayce's vision would later intersect unexpectedly with real, scientific investigations, ones that revealed there might indeed be hidden voids beneath the Sphinx, though their nature remains uncertain. In the late 20th century, the conversation about hidden spaces beneath the Sphinx shifted from the realm of prophecy to the tools of modern science. Geophysical surveys, particularly seismic refraction and ground-penetrating radar (GPR), began to map what lay beneath the monument without disturbing its structure. These methods measure how waves either sound or radar travel through the ground, revealing changes in density that can indicate the presence of voids, tunnels, or chambers. One of the earliest and most cited studies came in the late 1970s and early 1980s, when a team led by geophysicists Thomas Debetsky and John Anthony West conducted seismic surveys around the Sphinx. Their data suggested the presence of anomalous low-density zones beneath the monument's pores and along its flanks. These readings were consistent with hollow spaces, though the technology could not determine their contents or confirm whether they were natural formations or man-made structures. Further interest arose in the 1990s, when a Japanese team from Waseda University used additional remote sensing techniques around the Sphinx and nearby areas. They reported detecting subsurface cavities, some of them rectangular in shape, which again raised questions about their origin and purpose. These findings, while intriguing, were released without full peer-reviewed publication, leaving room for skepticism within the archaeological community. Egyptian authorities have acknowledged that voids and fractures exist beneath the Sphinx, but their official stance is that these are natural features in the limestone bedrock, formed by geological processes over thousands of years. Without excavation or direct access, the nature of these spaces remains speculative. Still, the fact that multiple independent surveys using different methods and conducted by different teams have detected anomalies has kept the discussion alive. To some, These results are tantalizing confirmation that the Sphinx may conceal hidden chambers, possibly connected to the Hall of Records legend. To others, they are simply reminders that even the most studied monuments can still hold unexplored geological complexities. The idea that cavities beneath the Sphinx might connect to a broader network under the Giza Plateau is not a modern invention, but it has gained new life alongside the results of seismic and radar surveys. Ancient texts and medieval accounts occasionally mention hidden passages, secret tunnels, and storerooms beneath the great monuments of Egypt, though these references are often vague and difficult to verify. In the 20th century, as archaeological mapping of Giza improved, researchers discovered genuine subterranean features in the area. Beneath the Great Pyramid itself lies a descending passage that leads to unfinished chambers carved directly into the bedrock. Nearby, the so-called Tomb of Osiris on the causeway to the Pyramid of Kaffa features multiple levels of underground construction, including a submerged chamber accessed by a deep vertical shaft. These examples prove that the ancient builders were capable of creating complex subterranean spaces. Proponents of the Hall of Records legend and other speculative theories see these structures as part of a larger, interconnected system, an intentional underground network for storage, ritual, or refuge. They point to the positioning of anomalies beneath the Sphinx as potentially strategic, located at a key focal point between the main pyramids. In this interpretation, the cavities detected in seismic surveys are not isolated voids, but gateways to a broader complex. Skeptics counter that while underground construction is well documented in Egypt, there is no solid evidence linking the Sphinx to any extensive network. The geological anomalies could be independent features, unrelated to known structures. Without excavation or direct access, it is impossible to determine whether these voids are naturally formed or the work of ancient engineers. Still, the concept of an underground network continues to capture attention because it aligns with both mythological traditions and demonstrated engineering capabilities. If proven, it would radically expand our understanding of how the Giza Plateau was used and what purpose these hidden spaces might have served. Whether for ceremonial functions, safeguarding knowledge, or entirely practical reasons, the existence of a deliberate network beneath the surface would add a new dimension to one of the world's most studied archaeological landscapes. While the possibility of hidden chambers beneath the Sphinx is compelling, the path to verifying such claims is shaped as much by politics as by science. In Egypt, all archaeological activity is subject to strict oversight by the Ministry of Tourism and Antiquities, which controls access to monuments and regulates any form of excavation. This includes non-invasive studies such as ground penetration, radar, or seismic testing, which still require official permission. The stated purpose of these restrictions is preservation. The Sphinx is not only an archaeological treasure, but also a national symbol and a major driver of tourism. Authorities argue that any invasive work could damage the monument or destabilize its structure, particularly if voids or tunnels exist beneath its weight. Conservation priorities often outweigh exploratory ambitions, especially when the proposed work is linked to theories that fall outside the mainstream academic consensus. These restrictions also intersect with Egypt's carefully maintained historical narrative. For decades, the Sphinx has been presented to the world as a creation of the Old Kingdom, built under Pharaoh Kaffa. Discoveries that could imply a different origin, or that tie into speculative legends like the Hall of Records, are often approached with caution. Officials may be wary of encouraging interpretations that could distract from or challenge the established story told in museums, textbooks, and tourism campaigns. Foreign research teams face additional hurdles. Proposals must include collaboration with Egyptian institutions, detailed plans for publication, and sometimes even provisions for the public presentation of results. Sensitive projects can be delayed for years or quietly declined without official explanation. This has led some researchers to suspect that political and reputational concerns can influence which investigations are approved, particularly when they have the potential to stir public controversy. As a result, while the tools exist to map and even access any hidden chambers beneath the Sphinx, their use is limited by policy and bureaucracy unless authorities decide to authorize a targeted investigation. The anomalies detected by seismic and radar surveys will remain just that, patterns in data, open to interpretation but beyond physical confirmation. For now, the legend of the Hall of Records continues to occupy the space between possibility and proof, shaped as much by what we are allowed to search for as by what might actually be there. Flood stories appear in the traditions of cultures on every inhabited continent, often forming some of the oldest layers of their oral or written histories. While details differ from one culture to another, the broad pattern is remarkably consistent: a catastrophic inundation that destroys much of the world, sparing only a few survivors who preserve life and knowledge for the generations that follow. In Mesopotamia, the Epic of Gilgamesh records the tale of Utnapishtim, who is warned by the gods of a coming flood and instructed to build a large vessel. This account predates and parallels the biblical story of Noah, in which a righteous man preserves his family and the animals aboard an ark while floodwaters cover the earth. In the traditions of ancient Greece, the flood of Deucalion tells of a similar destruction, with the world repopulated by survivors after the waters recede. Far from the Mediterranean, indigenous cultures of the Americas also preserve vivid flood narratives. The Hopi speak of previous worlds destroyed by water, while Mayan texts refer to a great deluge that wiped out an earlier creation. In South America, Andean myths describe a time when floodwaters rose from the sea, forcing people to seek refuge on the highest mountains. In Asia, Hindu texts recount the story of Manu, who was warned by a divine fish of an impending flood and builds a vessel to survive. In China, one of the most enduring legends is the tale of Yu the Great, who labored to control the floodwaters that threatened the land. Even in the Pacific Islands, oral traditions describe ocean waters overwhelming low-lying lands, forcing migrations to higher ground. These stories are more than isolated folktales. They represent a cross-cultural motif that has endured for thousands of years. The consistency of their core elements, the overwhelming waters, the survival of a small remnant, and the beginning of a new era suggests that they may preserve a distant memory of real catastrophic events. Whether these myths recall a single global flood or multiple large-scale inundations in different regions, they have fueled speculation about ancient disasters powerful enough to reshape human history. In the last few decades, advances in geology, paleoclimatology, and oceanography have provided scientific frameworks for understanding how catastrophic flooding events might have occurred in the distant past. One of the most compelling contexts for such events is the Younger Dryas period, a sudden and dramatic climatic shift that took place between roughly 12,900 and 11,700 years ago. Evidence from ice cores, sediment layers, and fossilized pollen shows that during the Younger Dryas, global temperatures dropped abruptly after a period of post-Ice Age warming. The causes are still debated, but one leading hypothesis involves a massive influx of fresh water into the North Atlantic, disrupting ocean circulation patterns. This influx could have come from the sudden draining of glacial lakes in North America, such as Lake Agassiz, when ice dams collapsed. The release of such vast quantities of water would have caused catastrophic flooding across large regions. Another theory, the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis, proposes that a comet or fragments of a comet struck the Earth, triggering widespread wildfires, atmospheric dust, and rapid melting of ice sheets. Supporters point to layers of microspherules, nanodiamonds, and elevated levels of platinum found in sediment cores from multiple continents as possible evidence of such an impact. If true, the resulting meltwater pulses would have drastically raised sea levels in a relatively short time. Geological records support the occurrence of dramatic sea level rises at the end of the last ice age. Coastal mapping and underwater archaeology have identified submerged landscapes, once habitable plains that now lie beneath hundreds of feet of ocean water. Sites like the Doggerland region in the North Sea, the Sunda Shelf in Southeast Asia, and areas off the coast of India were all lost to rising seas within human memory of the time. These findings suggest that ancient peoples around the world could indeed have experienced flooding on a scale that would leave deep cultural scars. While not all events were global in scope, the combination of rapid sea level rise, regional megafloods, and shifting climate would have created conditions that match the catastrophic imagery found in so many flood myths. In this light, the stories may represent preserved accounts of real geological events, translated over generations into the symbolic language of myth. When the Younger Dryas evidence is placed alongside the geological debate at Giza, a plausible narrative emerges, one that connects global climate instability to local patterns of erosion and human response. If periods of intense rainfall and rapid hydrological change occurred in North Africa at the end of the Ice Age, then the rounded channels and vertical fissures observed in the Sphinx enclosure could be read as part of that wetter legacy. The hypothesis does not claim certainty. It proposes a context. In a climate capable of sustained precipitation, limestone exposed at the surface would weather differently than in the hyper-arid conditions known from the last 5 millennia, producing the water-worn profiles some geologists describe. This climatic lens also reflects the discussion about subsurface features beneath the Giza Plateau. If societies along the Nile experienced dramatic swings in water availability, flood pulses, shifting river courses, seasonal extreme subterranean construction may have served practical aims as well as ritual ones. Underground chambers maintain more stable temperatures, protect stores from evaporation and pests, and offer shelter during environmental stress. In regions with fluctuating water tables, carved channels and chambers can also act as controlled reservoirs or conduits. Thus, the idea of a refuge or storage network beneath Giza is not only mythic, it aligns with how ancient communities elsewhere adapted to volatility. Non-invasive, seismic radar and MOON imaging now hint at voids and geometrically organized spaces beneath parts of the plateau, while their age and function remain unconfirmed. The possibility that some elements originated in wetter epochs cannot be dismissed outright. A multi-phased history is conceivable. Earlier, cavities or cuttings created during a humid period, later reused, expanded, or ritualized by Old Kingdom builders. The Sphinx itself may fit such a palimpsest model and inherited core, recarved and integrated into a dynastic complex, its weathering recording conditions from more than one era. Skeptics point out, rightly, that imaging anomalies are not proof of habitation or hydrological systems, and that without secure dating, the link to late Pleistocene climate remains tentative. Geological heterogeneity can mimic architecture, and ceremonial motives alone could explain some underground works. Moreover, Egyptian chronology rests on robust archaeological anchors, inscriptions, tool marks, quarry roads, and settlement, layers that tie much of Giza's visible monumentality to the Old Kingdom. Even so, integrating global flood science with site-specific observations provides a disciplined way to ask better questions. If wetter phases touched Giza, where are the sedimentary signatures within enclosure fills? Can micro-erosion studies along protected faces refine exposure histories? Do isotopic analyses of mortar and salt efflorescence distinguish construction and re-entry phases? Each line of inquiry moves the debate from broad speculation toward testable propositions. In this view, the flood myths, the Younger Dryas research, and Giza's contested erosion are not competing stories, but overlapping layers. Together, they sketch a scenario in which climate shocks left marks on stone, on memory, and perhaps beneath the sand reminders that human responses to water, scarcity and excess alike, can carve as deeply into the landscape as any chisel. For much of the last century, the dominant model of human history has been one of steady, linear progression. In this framework, small, mobile hunter-gatherer groups gradually developed agriculture, settled into permanent communities, and only after thousands of years began building complex societies with monumental architecture. Civilization, in this view, emerges late and advances in predictable stages, first simple, then increasingly sophisticated. If, however, monuments like the Sphinx or other megalithic structures around the world were proven to be far older than currently believed, that narrative would face a profound challenge. It would suggest that advanced engineering and large-scale construction did not necessarily depend on the long build-up of agriculture and incremental technological gains. Instead, these capabilities could have appeared in bursts, perhaps in response to unique cultural, environmental, or even survival pressures. Such a revision would also imply that the skills needed for quarrying, transporting, and precisely shaping massive blocks of stone, along with the social organization to direct such labor, were present in periods we currently label as prehistoric. That would mean our timeline is missing entire chapters in which human groups achieved levels of coordination and technical knowledge far earlier than textbooks acknowledge. This possibility disrupts the neat sequence from simple to complex, replacing it with a picture of human history marked by rises and falls, periods of advancement followed by disruption, loss, and reinvention. Climate shocks, natural disasters, or other large-scale events could have erased or scattered evidence of these early achievements, leaving later civilizations to rediscover or reinterpret the skills of their predecessors. Rewriting the timeline would also alter the way we view cultural transmission. If sophisticated architecture existed millennia before the oldest known states, it raises the question of whether later societies inherited elements of design, symbolism, or engineering from much earlier cultures, carrying forward fragments of knowledge whose origins were already ancient to them. In this sense, some firsts in history might not be first at all, but rather revivals of ideas conceived in a deeper, largely forgotten past. When considering how older than expected monuments could reshape history, it is useful to look at sites that have already disrupted conventional timelines. One of the most prominent examples is Göbekli Tepe in southeastern Turkey, discovered in the 1990s. This site features massive T-shaped stone pillars arranged in circular enclosures, many carved with intricate animal reliefs. Radiocarbon dating places its construction as early as 9600 BC, thousands of years before the rise of cities, writing, or the wheel. Göbekli Tepe's existence overturns the assumption that complex, monumental architecture could only emerge after the development of settled agriculture. In fact, the evidence suggests the reverse. Large-scale construction projects may have preceded and perhaps even encouraged the transition to farming. Here was a society of hunter-gatherers capable of mobilizing labor, sourcing and transporting multi-ton stones, and creating symbolic art on a grand scale without the supposed prerequisites of civilization. Similarly, underwater archaeological sites hint at landscapes and structures from periods of lower sea levels, now submerged by post-ice age ocean rise. Off the coast of India, near the Gulf of Comhat, sonar surveys have identified geometric features interpreted by some researchers as possible building foundations. While the interpretation remains debated, the seabed context suggests these features could date back to a time before the current shoreline existed. In Japan, the Yonaguni Monumenta series of submerged terraces, steps, and angular formations has provoked discussion about whether it is a natural formation enhanced by humans or entirely man-made. If proven artificial and ancient, it would represent another case of complex stoneworking from a time when such construction is not expected in the archaeological record. Even without full consensus on their origins, sites like Göbekli Tepe and these underwater formations demonstrate that our understanding of when and where advanced construction first appeared is far from complete. They show that monumental architecture can arise under conditions very different from the ones outlined in the traditional model. If the Sphinx or other Giza structures were conclusively dated to similarly early periods, they would join this list of anomalies, landmarks that do not fit the standard sequence. And as with Göbekli Tepe, the discovery would not simply add one more site to the map. It would force a revaluation of the entire story of human development, raising the possibility that high levels of organization and engineering skill emerged independently and repeatedly across deep time. If monuments like the Sphinx or other megalithic structures were definitively proven to be far older than the accepted historical timeline, the most compelling question would be, who built them? The answer might point toward cultures that have left little to no direct trace, societies erased by time, climate shifts, or catastrophic events. In this scenario, what we know as the dawn of civilization might instead be a rediscovery of skills and ideas from much earlier, now vanished ancestors. A civilization does not have to be global in scale to leave a lasting imprint. It could have been regional, thriving for centuries or millennia, developing specialized knowledge in architecture, astronomy, or engineering. Such a culture might have been highly adept at working with stone, aligning monuments with celestial events, and organizing large labor forces. Yet without extensive use of durable writing systems, metal tools, or widespread agriculture, much of their material culture could vanish, leaving only the most enduring works, massive stone structures, silent witnesses. If knowledge from these cultures was intentionally preserved, the methods could range from oral tradition to symbolic encoding in art and architecture. Myths and legends, such as global flood narratives, might then be reinterpreted as memory fragments, describing both the achievements and the destruction of these societies. In some cases, later civilizations could have inherited and adapted this knowledge without fully understanding its origins, weaving it into their own cultural frameworks. The concept of a knowledge archive, preserved for future generations, appears in many ancient traditions. From the Hall of Records legend at Giza to the idea of hidden libraries in Mesoamerica, these stories may reflect a persistent human impulse to safeguard essential wisdom against the inevitabilities of disaster and cultural collapse. If such an archive were ever found, whether beneath the Sphinx, in an unexcavated pyramid chamber, or submerged offshore, it could fill in missing chapters of our history and confirm the existence of civilizations now only hinted at by anomalies in stone. Speculation about lost civilizations must, of course, be tempered by evidence, yet the possibility remains that the human story is not a straight line from primitive to advanced, but a cycle of rise, loss, and rebirth. In that light, the monuments we see today may be less the starting point of civilization and more its surviving echoes, pointing back to times and cultures we have yet to rediscover. History offers no shortage of ideas that were once dismissed, mocked, or ignored, only to be later confirmed by evidence. In the early 20th century, Alfred Wegener proposed that the continents had once been joined together and had since drifted apart, a theory he called continental drift. His peers largely rejected it at the time, citing a lack of a plausible mechanism. Decades later, the discovery of seafloor spreading and plate tectonics vindicated his hypothesis, transforming our understanding of Earth's geology. Similarly, the idea that stones could fall from the sky meteorites was ridiculed by scientists. The concept seemed to contradict reason and known physics, yet careful documentation of meteor falls, coupled with chemical analysis, eventually proved that such objects were indeed extraterrestrial in origin, reshaping our view of the cosmos and our planet's place within it. In medicine, the notion that microscopic organisms could cause disease faced resistance for centuries. Germ theory, championed by figures like Louis Pasteur and Robert Koch, overturned centuries of medical tradition and laid the foundation for modern public health. Today, it is not only accepted but fundamental to our understanding of biology and disease prevention. Even in archaeology, there are examples where seemingly implausible claims turned out to be accurate. The city of Troy, immortalized in Homer's Iliad, was long thought to be a poetic invention until 19th century excavations by Heinrich Schliemann revealed layers of a real ancient city at Hisarlik in modern-day Turkey. While methods were crude by today's standards, his discoveries forced scholars to re-evaluate the relationship between myth and history. These examples remind us that progress often depends on the willingness to entertain ideas outside the prevailing consensus, while also demanding that such ideas be tested rigorously. Not every extraordinary claim will stand the test of evidence, but history shows that some will, and when they do, they can fundamentally reshape the way we understand the world. Mysteries have always been catalysts for discovery. Questions that sit on the boundary between the known and the unknown invite investigation, encouraging both professionals and the public to look deeper. The allure of the unexplained is not confined to fringe ideas. It is embedded in the very process of science, which thrives on identifying gaps in understanding and working to fill them. In astronomy, for example, the mystery of wandering stars in the night sky planets led early observers to develop more precise methods of tracking celestial motion, culminating in Kepler's laws and Newton's theory of gravity. In geology, the unexplained patterns of fossil distribution across continents encouraged scientists to imagine past landscapes and climates, which in turn paved the way for the acceptance of continental drift. In each case, an initial puzzle motivated deeper research that yielded transformative insights. The same dynamic operates in archaeology and history. Sites like Göbekli Tepe, the Nazca Lines, or submerged structures off the coast of Yonaguni provoke questions not only about the past, but also about the processes of cultural development and technological innovation. These enigmas draw attention, funding, and interdisciplinary collaboration, sometimes from fields far removed from traditional archaeology, such as engineering, geology, and remote sensing. In education, mystery engages students more effectively than rote facts. A classroom that begins with a compelling question: why does the Great Pyramid align so precisely with true north? Could an ancient monument be older than recorded history? Sets the stage for critical thinking. Students learn to evaluate evidence, test hypotheses, and consider alternative explanations, all while maintaining a sense of curiosity. This balance between wonder and analysis cultivates skills that extend far beyond any single subject. Moreover, mysteries humanize the scientific process. They remind us that knowledge is not a fixed set of truths, but a constantly evolving conversation. Even when a mystery is solved, the process of chasing answers often reveals new questions, ensuring that the pursuit of understanding remains an open-ended journey. The healthiest approach to extraordinary claims lies in the dynamic tension between wonder and skepticism. Wonder keeps us open to possibilities, ready to explore new ideas without prematurely closing the door. Skepticism keeps us grounded, demanding that claims be supported by verifiable evidence before they enter the realm of accepted knowledge. Together, they form a system of checks and balances that allows human understanding to expand without drifting into unfounded belief. This interplay is not a contradiction, it is a partnership. Without wonder, inquiry loses its spark. A purely skeptical mindset risks dismissing questions before they can be properly investigated, cutting off potential breakthroughs. Without skepticism, however, wonder can drift into credulity, embracing every intriguing story without discrimination, and eroding trust in serious investigation. In the context of ancient mysteries and alternative historical hypotheses, this balance is especially important. The idea that a monument like the Sphinx might predate known civilization, or that lost knowledge could be hidden in undiscovered chambers, demands careful study. It invites us to explore new methods, re-examine old evidence, and challenge assumptions, but also to apply rigorous standards so that interpretation does not outpace proof. Scientific history is full of cases where new evidence has overturned consensus, and equally full of ideas that did not survive scrutiny. Maintaining a posture of both openness and rigor ensures that we can distinguish between the two. This approach allows us to entertain possibilities without falling into the trap of treating speculation as fact. In the end, wonder and skepticism are not opposing forces, but complementary tools. One drives us to ask questions, the other helps us refine the answers. Together, they safeguard the integrity of discovery while preserving the excitement that makes discovery worth pursuing in the first place. When applied in balance, they allow us to navigate the vast space between the known and the unknown, where the most important questions often reside. As the sun dips low over the Giza plateau, the ancient stones take on a warmer hue, their long shadows stretching across the sand. The Great Pyramid rises with geometric precision, and the Sphinx gazes silently eastward, as it has for millennia. To the casual observer, these monuments are simply relics of Egypt's old kingdom grand, testaments to the skill and ambition of a civilization at its peak. But to those who have walked through the questions, examined the evidence, and considered the possibilities, they are far more than that. Beneath the familiar forms lie layers of mystery. Geological patterns hint at a past climate far wetter than today's desert, while radar and seismic surveys suggest unseen chambers hidden below the surface. Myths of floods and lost knowledge echo across cultures, finding possible resonance. Here, in the shadow of the pyramids, from the legend of the Hall of Records to the Younger Dryas floods, from the engineering of Göbekli Tepe to underwater ruins scattered across the globe, each thread we've explored challenges the notion that history is a neat, linear story. These mysteries matter not just for what they might reveal about the past, but for what they remind us about the present, that knowledge is always provisional, that discovery is a process, and that the past is deeper and more complex than we can see at first glance. If even a fraction of these anomalies point to forgotten chapters of human history, the implications would ripple through archaeology, anthropology, and our understanding of civilization itself. And so, as the last light fades and the plateau falls into shadow, the questions remain. What lies beneath the Sphinx's pause? How old are these monuments truly? Who first imagined and built on this scale? And why? These are not questions that will be answered in a single lifetime. They will wait here, in stone and silence, for the tools and minds of future generations, ready to reveal their truths to those willing to listen.